We are taking the following DFS plays or bets, or are you going to roll to another option on tonight's big, beefy 3-game NBA slate? So you have Giannis on the road taking on the 76ers. He's the most expensive player on the slate at 11-4. That's $900 more than Paul George. Also, no Embiid, no Kawhi this evening. So do you have to pick Giannis for your DFS lineups, or can you roll off of him to someone else, Nick?
For me, it's Giannis or it's Paul George. Like you said, we have a small slate, smaller than normal, even for Tuesday. I think the NBA is kind of taking the night off and letting college basketball have the spotlight here. So you don't have a ton of elite options. I'm definitely okay paying for Giannis at 11-4. Bucks have obviously struggled on offense over these last few games. They've scored under 100 points in 4 of their last 5, not something we're used to seeing from Milwaukee. But, of course, they've had a ton of key pieces out. They really haven't had anywhere near their full rotation for any game this season. I think they're going to be fine long-term. But nonetheless, despite some of the struggles, Giannis has still been putting up huge numbers. He had 67 DraftKings points against Washington on Sunday. That was a game that wasn't particularly close. Didn't really matter. So even if you're a little bit worried about, a shorthanded Sixers team making this game closer than it should be, or Milwaukee continuing to struggle, the nice thing is it hasn't really affected Giannis's DFS production all that much so far.
Garion, do you have to have Giannis in your lineup tonight?
I would say that the tough thing about making it definitive is because we have such a small slate, there's not a ton of obvious value spots. So if you stick Giannis in there, you're sort of limiting what you can do elsewhere, because the value we do have, namely anyone playing for the Philadelphia 76ers, it's going to be pretty chalky. People understand that there's about 7 guys who can play for the Sixers tonight. They're on the second night of a back-to-back. But again, if you can afford Giannis, by all means, put Giannis into a lineup. He's fantastic. He's averaging 1.72 DraftKings points per minute played so far this season. And I think, if this were last year, we'd be talking about how this might be a spot to avoid Giannis because, there's obvious blowout potential here with the Bucks going up against a 76er squad that is unrecognizable. However, we can't really take anything for granted with the Bucks right now. They've lost 5 of their last 6 games. They've got a negative net rating for the season as a whole. They're going through their own COVID situation with Chris Middleton. So, yeah, I think Giannis is probably going to play 35, 36 minutes in this game. And so far this season, he's averaging 65 DraftKings points in the 4 games he's played, over 34 and a half minutes. So he's amazing. If you can afford him, do it.
Well, Gary, and let's stick with the Bucks here and look at some value, though. Bobby Portis going for more than 45 DK fantasy points last time out. That was against the Wizards. He played 31 minutes. He collected 13 points and 13 boards. His salary jumps from 4.6 on that slate to 5.4, almost $1,000 on the menu tonight, a much smaller one, as we've mentioned. Is he still a good value play to pick in your mind, or you want to roll to someone who could give you better value?
No, I think he's a perfectly fine value play. I mean, the great thing about Bobby Portis is he really has no conscience. He is willing to take any shot that becomes available because of whoever is missing on the Bucks. Obviously, Drew Holiday's role is steadily increasing. We've seen him go from 20 minutes and not starting to almost 30 minutes and starting in the Bucks' last game on Sunday. So you would assume that maybe Holiday's up to 34, 35 minutes tonight. And when he's on the court, he is the clear number 2 option behind Giannis. But Portis so far this season, he's got a 26% usage rate. He's taking more shots per 100 possessions than Chris Middleton when Middleton's healthy. Bobby Portis, as I said, is more than willing to fill any void he possibly can. So even with the slight price increase on this slate, I think he's a very good option. He's just someone who's more than willing to take the shots you need him to.
Whalen, what do you want to do at value? You're going to roster Portis? Or you looking at someone else?
Yeah, I think I'll have some exposure to Portis in some lineups tonight. I think he remains a good value, essentially as long as Brook Lopez is sidelined. There is maybe some concern about, if he's matched up playing small ball center against Andre Drummond, what does that mean for his rebounding upside? I think there are some question marks there. But again, until Lopez is back, I think Bobby Portis is going to be a nightly value play. But Garion mentioned, that Sixers game that I think is where we're going to find the most value. I like Furkan Korkmaz quite a bit at 4,900. I think that's a really reasonable price tag for a guy who's played a ton of minutes with all their absences. Tyrese Maxey, 6,200, also in that category. Even Seth Curry. All 3 of those guys, I think, are really nice values. But my favorite value play tonight might be Nick Batum at 5,200. At least 34 DraftKings points in 3 of his last 4 games. He's quietly off to another really good start when Marcus Morris sidelined indefinitely. He scores, he rebounds, he's been racking up a ton of steals, he even blocks some shots. I mean, crazy to think that this guy was essentially out of the league a year and a half ago.
Let's go over to the DraftKings Sportsbook here, dudes. Utah Jazz, the largest favorite on tonight's 3-game slate. Favored by 8 points over the Hawks. Jazz 3-0 at home this year, 6-4 ATS, while Atlanta 1-6 on the road, 3-8 ATS overall. Would you pick the Jazz to cover the spread, or is there another spread on tonight's slate that you would roll to, Nick?
You know, I do like Milwaukee to cover 5.5 at Philly. I think this is a really tough spot for the shorthanded Sixers on the second half of a back-to-back, and I know Milwaukee's sideline or has guys sidelined as well, and Philly's played pretty well given the circumstances with the guys that they've had out. But I think you're asking a lot for the Sixers, to compete in that game. But if you're looking at this Atlanta-Utah game, I mean, Atlanta has really fallen off over the last week or so. They've dropped 4 straight, another blowout loss last night at Golden State. They lost by 18 to this Utah team just last week. So not a ton of reasons right now to put faith in this Hawks team. I have no trouble rolling with the Jazz tonight.
You got any issues rolling with the Jazz, Garion?
No, I mean, it's a big number. It's probably says something about just how I view the Hawks from last season, that seeing at this number is so jarring. And I would agree with Nick. I think I would be more comfortable just betting the Bucks here. I think I like their number against the spread a little bit more. But at the same time, I mean, you mentioned it, Emerson. The Hawks have just been terrible on the road so far this season. For the season as a whole, they have the 4th worst defensive rating in basketball. It just doesn't seem like they've figured out their rotation. And I don't want to say there's been infighting or anything like that, because, we haven't seen anything to that level. But I think it's clear there's, some unhappiness about some younger players who are in their 3rd, 4th seasons who are not getting the minutes they maybe feel like they should be getting. I mean, Kevin Huerter's barely playing, and he just signed a $100 million contract. So, there's just some weird chemistry stuff going on with the Hawks right now where that never seems to be an issue with the Jazz. Oh, no, wait, it was. It was a really big issue for them at a very distinct moment. But the Jazz are playing really well, and they just play incredibly well at home. Right now, they are outscoring opponents by 13.3 points per 100 possessions when they're playing in Utah. That's only a 3-game sample, but this is the kind of stuff we've seen from them basically the past half decade. So when the Jazz are at home, I really just have no issue siding with the Jazz.
Yeah, that game's got the highest total, too, on the 3-game slate, 223.5. But then you have the Clippers and the Blazers. That has a game total. It's the second highest on the slate, 221. Both of these teams are not very good at hitting the over this season. Portland, 3-7. LA, 3-6. Would you pick this game to go under its total, or do you want to roll to another one, Garion?
I'll actually take a slight over here. I know the risk you run with any game involving the Clippers is they just have a bad shooting night. I mean, if he's not going to score efficiently, this team will not score efficiently. That's sort of just how it works with the Clippers at this point. They just don't have efficient players around him. But I think for the Blazers, they're starting to play a little bit better offensively. At least some of their key pieces are. Dame finally had a really good game, a Dame-like performance. Robert Covington has also sneakily just been a lot better as of late. He's 11 for his last 20 from three-point range across the last 3 games. So I think if the Blazers are sort of finding themselves offensively, I know they're not a terrible defensive team, but I still don't think they're a top 10 defensive team. And both these teams are top 10 in pace so far this season. So I think we actually do see this game sneak over the number.
Nick, is this a total that you would target? You more confident in the over or under, or you want to go somewhere else?
I don't know that I would target this game. I think I do like the under a little bit more maybe than Garion does. And my concerns lie more with Damian Lillard than they do Paul George. And Garion is right. If Paul George is not having an efficient night, the Clippers don't necessarily have that great number 2 option. You have a handful of guys that have been fine, as secondary options, but at least in Portland, I mean, the Blazers are lucky, I think, to be a 500 team with the way that Lillard has started this season, and they're able to fall back on CJ McCollum, who's just always solid, one of the highest floor guards in the league. Nurkic has been fine so far. Covington, like Garion said, has turned it around of late. But if you can't count on Damian Lillard to have those kind of games, Portland's just going to struggle to score points. They can still find ways to win, but they're not going to be putting up, those gaudy 115, 120 type of point totals. I mean, they've gone under 110 points just once in their last 5 games. Or no, excuse me, they've gone over 110 points just once in their last 5 games. And like Garion said, Lillard had that game against the Lakers over the weekend. He had 6 threes. He took 14. He started to shoot the ball more confidently. But overall, it's been ugly. I mean, he's had some 0 of 9, 0 of 8, 2 of 14 type of shooting games so far. I kind of want to see Dame string a couple of these games together before I'm willing to trust that he's ready to start carrying this Blazers offense again. So until that happens, I have to lean under here.
Gentlemen, bring us home with your slate-approved pick. Nick, hook me up with your favorite DFS play or bet on tonight's 3-game NBA slate.
I'm going back to that Portland Clippers game. I like Yusuf Nurkic over 10.5 rebounds in this game. The Clippers are one of the worst rebounding teams in the league. I think we might start to see slightly less of Ivica Zubac as they phase Serge Ibaka back into that rotation. I don't know that that's great for the Clippers rebounding numbers. You could also get Nurkic to have a double-double at plus money at the DK Sportsbook. That's plus 105. So if you like him over 10.5, I would recommend maybe rolling that into the double-double bet as well.
Garion, how about you? Slate-approved pick.
I'm going to go with Donovan Mitchell. He's $9,100 tonight. There was like a switch that flicked for him about 5 games ago after not like a terrible start, but a slow-ish start for Donovan Mitchell. His usage rate is above 40% the last 5 games. He's taken 82 shots in the Jazz last 3 games. Mitchell, I mean, you got to love him. He's just someone who's never turned down an open shot. He's never turned down a semi-contested shot, and that is great for the purposes of DFS. I know we always talk about how his ceiling is at its highest when Mike Conley is not playing. It doesn't seem to matter right now. He's just taking control of this offense. He's on fire, and I think at 9,100 against a Hawks team that, as we talked about, has been struggling defensively so far this season, he's in a really nice spot.